Recently, two officers from the top-notch investigation team of India, the Central Bureau of Investigation, were caught in a bribery scandal. Senior police officer R.K. Rishi and Inspector Kapil Dhankar were accused of trying to influence an ongoing bank fraud investigation. In spite of India moving from 80 to 83, which is a positive move for lesser corruption than the past, India has a long way to go. CBI, India's premier investigating agency, getting embroiled in corruption is a new low. Corruption and bribery in India are a big challenge. It is what makes many investors run away. Also, many businesses decide to exit the market. Corruption and bribery has been blamed for stunting the economy of India. The Indian government has tried to crack down on bribery and corruption. An amendment was made in the year 2018. The amendment aims at setting up watchdog institutions. Under the amended Bill of Prevention of Corruption Act 1988, bribery is a punishable offence. Whoever commits the offence of bribery shall be punished with an imprisonment for a term which may extend to 7 years, or with fine, or with both. But a new provision to jail the person who has given a bribe has set back the reportage of bribes. People in positions of power continue to take bribes. And now, if one reports that they have given a bribe, then they'll end up in jail soon after, while the person who's taken the bribe stays on the loose and continues to thrive. According to the United Nations Office of Drug and Crime, democracies may experience corruption when they lack transparency. UNODC supports efforts to ratify and implement the UN's Convention Against Corruption. Corruption has many forms. Beyond taking and giving bribes, also use of personal connections for getting the job done may be considered a form of corruption. The Indian government needs to provide victims of corruption with channels for redressal. The governments must ensure that bribery is actively investigated and prosecuted. If India wants to shift from a developing nation to a developed nation in the true senses of the term, then it must move fairly quickly. All serving and retired government servants and politicians must be investigated on how they acquired their wealth. Bureau Report, Democracy News Live, New Delhi. Good evening, I'm Rohit Gandhi and you're watching Democracy News Live. Welcome to our show, It Matters Today. We're doing a show around bribery in India. Bribery continues to fall to new lows each day. This year's Corruption Perception Index paints a grim picture of the state of corruption. So in spite of India moving from 80 to 86 among 180 countries, which is a positive move, India still has a long way to go. The global annual rating of the RTI Act of India shows that India was second best in the year 2011 and dropped to fourth best in the world in the year 2016. India has further dropped down to the sixth position in the year 2018 when it comes to transparency. In the last 15 years, more than 3.33 crore RTI applications were filed, 21.86 lakh, which is just over 2.1 million second appeals and complaints were filed. During 2005 to 2019, people, politicians, government officers, and even the investigating teams have left no stone unturned to uplift the wrong practices. Corruption has taken different forms in the country, and it is a huge challenge. Surveys reveal that with a corruption rate of 39%, India is the worst in Asia. Now, till date, 46% people use personal connections to access public services. The data is a clear reflection of the loopholes in India's democracy. which is corrupt and lacks transparency. Well, for more on this, we have a special panel joining us today. Madhu Bhalla. She's the chairperson of Transparency India. She's also a professor at the Delhi University. Also joining us is Jayant Bhatt. He's a practicing advocate at the Supreme Court of India. Also joining us is AP Singh. He's the former director of Central Bureau of Investigation. Let us first take a look at the top 10 scams in the last few years. So if you've seen, there are a tremendous amount of corruption, bribery scandals that dot this country over the last few years. Mr. Singh, let me first, come to you. You've been in the Central Bureau of Investigation. You understand how it works from the inside. How bad is the situation of bribery? Are we overstretching it, or is it truly a very bad state?
So let me explain to you. The Central Bureau of Investigation is basically an anti-corruption agency, and it really deals with corruption in the central government employees, and public sector undertakings. So it does not look at corruption all over India. It has specific areas, and out of the cases that you just mentioned, most of them were investigated by the CBI, or maybe almost all of them. So, uh, corruption is a problem in this country. There are certain areas specifically which the CBI always looks into. It's not the whole government, and we look at the big ticket cases. It's not possible for CBI to monitor each and every government servant or every department. So the CBI selectively chooses, the big ticket cases or the big ticket scams. So that's how basically the CBI functions, because you have about 1,000 cases registered in a year, 1,000 or 1,200 cases which CBI registers, out of which maybe 100 or 200 maybe special crime cases. So you could say 1,000 are corruption cases. Some are not very important, and some are very big. So most of the time of the CBI is taken by these big cases, like for example Malia. It would take a long time, or coal scam, or the 2G. Like when I was director in my term, CWG, Adarsh, and 2G. These are the three big scams that took almost the entire time of the agency. I mean, we spent all our time just investigating these three cases. So you have to prioritize. You cannot be looking at the
Everything.
entire spectrum of corruption in the country. You basically take up the big ticket items and then you concentrate on them.
Sure. And in terms of, the involvement of officials, the whole nexus sometimes between bureaucrats and politicians that we hear a lot about, how entrenched is the system in corruption overall? If you're looking at large scale tenders, you're looking at a large amount of money going in and out. Do you think, from your perspective and from your experience in investigating it, that there is a really wide scale nexus there?
See, it's basically it's collusive corruption. You see, once it's collusive, means both parties are benefiting. Then it's very difficult to be able to catch the people because and especially now that you say that even a complainant is equally liable. So, but in most cases that we used to investigate, it is basically on a complaint. You have draft cases where the person complains that he's being asked for a bribe and he doesn't want to give it. So then the CBI moves in and you catch them. Or somebody complains. You get anonymous complaints. You get complaints from people. But collusive corruption is what is the main issue in the country and in government. Collusive corruption, which means that both parties benefit. Like whether it's income tax or customs or banks, where the party that gives the bribe and where the party that takes the bribe are both benefiting. So it's very difficult in those cases to be able to take the investigation or to even register a case and take it to its logical conclusion.
Sure. Let me bring in Ms. Bhalla here. Ms. Bhalla, you are, head Transparency India. Now, explain to me the direct proportionality of lack of transparency with more corruption, and I think that's an established fact today. So, explain to the audience what's changed in India in the last few years, and I'm talking in the last 5, 6 years. Has there been a move towards less transparency?
I think we did well the RTI Act 2005, and that was a real deal breaker because it actually empowered citizens to be able to complain about, officials, corruptions, take them to town, ask for information on how the government acted at various levels that affected citizens. And that was fairly good because we had a rating in the annual rating of RTI acts, which actually we had the second best in 2011, and then we dropped to fourth best in the world in the year 2016, and we have further dropped down to sixth position in the year 2008. 2019 was a really bad year for the RTI Act because it got amended and in such a way that it actually took away the autonomy of chief information commissioners and put them under the purview of the central government, the whims of the central government, both in terms of salaries, in terms of their terms, and in terms also, therefore, of who, and in terms of who could be appointed as station commissioners or chief
And,
information
and why would
commissioners.
the government
And
do
then it
that,
was
ma'am,
very
from your perspective? Why did the government decide to do that?
government's position was it more parent, they were actually regulating, you know, uh, chief information commissioners in the RTI Act equivalent to election commissioners, but the government said, well, chief election commissioners are a constitutional body, whereas chief election commissioners, chief
Information.
information
Information Commission.
commissioners are, right? So this was a kind of a very casuistic argument to our, and really the end product of this has been a greater amount of control over who would be state information commissioners, chief information commissioners, and and essentially the neutrality of the institution. So this has been a real, it's been a real deterrent, I think, to the direction in which RTI was going, to the
So
transparency
for
that
the
was being demanded,
sure,
the neutrality,
sure.
etc.
So for the audience to just to understand, the RTI Act was brought in. the chief information commissioners were established in different states. Also, there was a central chief information commissioner, and they had the ability to basically decide on cases, call upon government departments, and obviously there were some cases that they wouldn't call upon because it involved India's national security. But beyond that, the government had very little control, and they were able to act and deliver information back to the people. It's the concept of the ombudsman. Anybody approaches the system, you get an answer from the government, and that is what's putting a lot of pressure on government employees. For example, there is a bad road that's been constructed. You write an RTI, ask who built this road, why did this road go down so quickly, and then the person who's built the road has to respond to it, which means why the quality was bad, what happened, and that is where things would begin unfolding. But the government of India decided to change that and take all of these appointments, etc., under its purview, which means you don't question the government. Let me bring in Mr. Bhatt here. Mr. Bhatt, explain to me from your perspective. I know last time when we had a conversation around this, is that you're saying it's not all bad when it comes to the new amended rules around, around corruption, and there is an opportunity for people to appeal this. But again, the system's a bit haywire. So explain to me what your concerns are with the present situation when it comes to fighting bribery.
So Rohit, there are a few things I think last time because first, look, the law in itself is not wrong. We have a robust law which was enacted in 88 and was subsequently amended in 2018. And as Madhuji has also rightly pointed out, certain provisions so far as who is appointing a particular person, that's a tectonic shift in its own sense. A state government or a central government or whatever mode of communication one has, the power may keep shifting from one government to the other, state, central. That's not the larger issue. I think the biggest question that we need to ask ourselves is how quickly can we address a problem? So, for example, if let's say I'm a complainant and I go to CBI and CBI investigates the matter promptly and then gets a FIR and a charge sheet filed in a court of law, that is first stage of the investigation. The second question that we need to ask ourselves is again, how quickly will the court give a verdict or come to a logical conclusion to a matter which has been charge sheeted and in which a trial has begun and is going to find a proper judgment in its own end. So the Act says, look, the ideal time period is 2 years for special CBI courts which have been appointed, also called the PCAT courts, Prevention of Corruption. There are CBI judges equivalent to a session judge. You have a Rouse Avenue Court, special district court dealing into CBI and corruption, etc. So yes, there are steps being taken, but it will take time. And as I keep telling people that usually needs a lot more for us to have good number of judges to handle the number of litigations which are any other criminal matter. So as Singh Saab also rightly pointed out, look, if he's or his team is handling big corruption matters, they take a lot amount of your energy, time, and efforts. So even let's say, because you're not increasing the number of CBI, but number of complaints which are right basis digitization, or because of awareness of people, or because of RTI activism, whatever you may name it. So lot many things come to light. But then we need to increase the number of CBI officers. We need to increase the judges. We need to increase the number of court staff. We don't have less number of lawyers in the court, but we have less number of judges. And if you see the judges to population ratio, it's quite demoralizing. So I think that is something any state or central government first needs to take care of. Increase the number of police force, increase the CBMs, so that at least they have enough task force. If a complainant wants to be fearless about putting a complaint in place, and then for that complaint to be charge sheeted and put to trial.
Sure. Understandable. So what you're saying is that there are challenges around how it's implemented. There are challenges around the number of courts that are there, and that needs to all change for it to actually take shape. Mr. Singh, if I may come back to you. What do you think is the first strand that's missing in stemming this corruption?
Well, actually, it's basically, as he rightly said, that it's the time consumed in the trial and investigations. I don't think take so long because there's a certain time limit. In CBI cases, you have a lot of foreign investigation. You have letters rogatory being sent, and it takes a lot of time to get replies. But once those come, even in trial, because in important cases you always have big ticket lawyers. They are very powerful lawyers. They are able to delay the trial of cases. The CBI the CBI does not have the same competency, in their prosecuting staff as the top lawyers, which are employed by, say, powerful people involved in, for example, in 2G or in Bofors or any of these cases. And they, all the top lawyers of the country come, and we do have, assistant solicitor generals and SGs and ASGs, but it depends on, you don't have that quality of prosecuting staff. These are people who just come for hearings, and they'll take a case and they may not continue with it. Somebody else will come. So the quality of prosecution, I think, investigation of course is there, but quality of prosecution also drastically needs to be revamped and improved in government investigating agencies, including the CBI for that matter.
Sure, absolutely. I've seen many a times cases have just fallen flat, Mr. Singh, because the prosecution in itself was faulty, the sampling collection was faulty, or there were issues around how the forensics were put together. And certainly those are the things that impact. Let me come back to you, Ms. Bhalla. Where do you think should be the first steps that need to be taken? What needs to be done right off the bat? If you were in government tomorrow, you were asked to create a better journey ahead, what will be the first thing that you would want to do?
I think the first thing we to ensure is that people based and make a file in RTI. I mean, if you look at the current situation of the information as opposed to language, percent of information are language, which is a really large amount. And this is discipline asking them to fill up these positions, and it is entirely within the state government and central government to fill these positions, right? It was very time to fill up the position of chief executive, and for a long time, for almost a year, he actually operated out of a five-star hotel, which is ridiculous. Where does an ordinary go to a five-star hotel and RTI complaint? This is a ridiculous situation. Sure. And then we also find very state the information commissioners which are point and do
your audio is breaking up, ma'am. Your audio is breaking up. So sorry. I think I'm gonna kind of wrap up the show in terms of, because I think one of the main things, the point you're making is the right to information needs to be sorted out properly again. There is enough that has been done, enough damage that's been done in not handling the RTI and the whole act properly. The government of India needs to make it more transparent if it really genuinely believes in abolishing corruption. It's not going to be an easy task. It's a very simple task. It actually can be done. So the government of India needs to be committed to stem out corruption. If it wants to continue on the path of corruption, then it's welcome to do so. But that's not what the Modi government promised when it came to power. And so instead of reversing India back from a good system around RTI, it is taking back India on that journey. And that needs to be stopped right away, unless and until they have a good enough reason, and it should better explain what is that good enough reason. Thank you all of you for watching. We will close the show on watching this video from UNODC, which talks about how transparency and bribery impact each other.
Corruption has been seen as an enabler. Corruption has been seen as an enabler for crime. It's important that we get together globally and look at the response. A enormous amounts of money are going back to economies that have been harmed by the pandemic. Governments have often traded the usual oversight and accountability mechanisms for speedy disbursement of these funds. This has created risks of corruption and fraud. We as UNODC have a network of global and regional advisors that provide on-site assistance to countries on measures to prevent and combat corruption. In the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have specifically focused on procurement measures and whistleblower protection measures. The Crime Congress enables us to look at the issue of crime holistically and to ensure that corruption is an integral part of our responses to crime.